Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor at USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Hour number 1, we're going to be talking with Kevin in Florida about appliance repairs and do-it-yourself maintenance. Hour number 2, Cathy in Ohio is going to be with us, and we're going to be talking about money-saving tips for you and your family. I've got a couple quick comments before Kevin comes on with us. He'll be on just a couple, maybe 2 minutes. Something that really happened yesterday that really bothers me. Buffalo, New York. It's headline news. So a lone man walking on the sidewalk. He had a face mask on. He had no weapons, no bricks, no sticks, no stones. Just a guy, 75-year-old white-haired man. He was brutally attacked by the Buffalo City, New York police. There are about 50 cops in riot gear, batons, weapons, helmets. You know what it is. Body armor, those kinds of things. So about 50 of these cops against one 75-year-old man who wanted to talk to them. He was shoved backwards. He fell backwards like he was sucker punched, went down instantly, hit his head on the back of his head on the sidewalk, cracked his skull. He lay unconscious, bleeding. One cop wanted to stop and help him, the one that pushed him over, and some other cop pushed him out of the way to keep going, keep marching. So this man lay unconscious on the sidewalk, bleeding. The man's in a hospital. He's in stable condition. The cops' names are not named, and neither is the man. If he dies, all 50 cops who marched in attack formation should be charged with third-degree murder, all 50 of them. They didn't help. And the 2 cops who shoved him to the ground, second-degree murder. Now, the 2 cops were suspended, but they weren't arrested. They should be in jail right now. All 50 should be in jail right now. The Buffalo City Police, Buffalo, New York, should be disbanded. Now, Americans are getting to see firsthand why countries all over the world dislike us. We're brutal. We're vicious. And now we're doing it to our own. We used to beat up little countries all over the world for their natural resources. Now we're beating up our own. It's got to stop. Kevin's with us. We're going to be talking about appliances. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning. What's new?
Boy, am I frosted. Kevin, do you have any comments about what I just said? Did you hear that story, or is that brand new?
I'm pretty frosted myself, too. It's going to be hard to focus on appliances this morning. But, yeah, it's nasty on both sides. You know, I know there's peaceful protesters somewhere in the mix, usually during the daytime, whose intentions are good, and they're absolutely right. Police brutality has been out of control for many decades in this country, and so has the black-on-black crime, the black-on-white crime, the white-collar crime. And, you know, the white-collar guys are just going to take advantage of this and use it to meet their ends. And I think in the end, this is going to end up with a black boot on the face for quite a long time. I don't think we're ever going to recover, unfortunately.
And if there is a black boot on our necks and face, there will be a whole bunch of Americans with 3030s, 308s, 30-06s, 223s, 556s, etc., that are going to come out of the woodwork. And I recommended to President Donald Trump, do not deploy the National Guard. Do not do it. And he said he was going to do it. And then he backed down. Somebody might be listening to USA Prepares at the White House, because we said when he didn't stop the flights from China and Europe, we said stop the flights for the coronavirus. They didn't do it. And then we hammered and hammered and hammered, and finally they did it. And we said that there would be there'd be rioting in the streets if they, the payments of $1,200 to every man, woman, and child in the United States, that was just to delay the rioting. And here we are. We called it right time after time after time. I'm not bragging. This is easy to see, but the mainstream doesn't see it. So here we are in our homes, and we've got appliances. And Kevin, I wanted to ask you a question, since you are a appliance repair professional. And that is, we talked about refrigerators, and we have a built-in refrigerator and a built-in freezer in our kitchen. So instead of having a combo refrigerator freezer, we have a box that is 17 cubic feet. It's all refrigerator. And right next to it, we have a matching freezer that's all freezer. So we have 17 cubic feet of refrigeration and 17 cubic feet of refrigerator. So one's a freezer, one's a refrigerator. They're side by side. So instead of just sticking the freezer out in the garage, we have it in our kitchen. Now, it's surrounded by cabinetry, and I clean out those coils all the time, the condenser coils, to keep the dust off them so that they operate more efficiently. But here's the question: many of us have these kinds of refrigerators or refrigerator freezers or freezers pushed up against the wall, the back wall. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is, Kevin, what is the possibility for adequate circulation if you push the refrigerator all the way back against the wall rather than pull it out an inch or two from the back wall?
It just suffocates the refrigerator, essentially. It overheats the coils and lessens the lifespan of the refrigerator. I always recommend a minimum of 4 inches from the back wall.
Okay, and some people are thinking, whoa, you want me to pull the refrigerator out 4 inches and I'm going to lose 4 inches of floor space in front of the refrigerator? So the reason that I believe these refrigerators and freezers, etc., are pushed all the way back is because people don't want to yield that real estate to the refrigerator. But it's refrigerator suicide if you don't keep that at least a couple inches, right? Minimum a couple inches, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
At least.
All right. Okay, so Kevin, I'm your student today as well as the rest of the class. What would you like to teach us about appliance repairs and do-it-yourself maintenance?
Well, I was thinking we could talk about troubleshooting. I actually have a methodology that I picked up from my main teacher, the Master Samurai Scott, who owns appliantology.org and mastersamurai.tech.com, which is where I've gotten a lot of my education from. And this method of troubleshooting is called the 10-step tango.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, it goes like this. So the first step is you formulate the basic problem statement on your own. Usually the customers will say, it's leaking on the inside or something. And we've talked about this. When I first hear that, I can say, okay, it's probably a blocked defrost drain. That's just an example. So you formulate the problem statement no matter what the appliance. The next step, step 2, is to download the schematic or find the paper schematic on the appliance. Not to be confused with a wiring diagram. Wiring diagrams are usually a little bit more messy and they actually label the wires, but schematics are more boiled down and simplified. And so you do a schematic overview, and the step 3 is you identify your load of interest, the part or the system, the circuit that you think is the possible problem. Step 4 is to do a circuit analysis on that load of interest. According to the service manual, what is the voltage output or input? What is the resistance specifications that need to be tested on this particular component? You test that. Step 5 is to formulate a troubleshooting hypothesis. I think this is the issue. I suspect this is the issue. I'm going to test it. So we'll go back over the first 5 steps. 1, formulate the problem statement. 2, check out the schematic. 3, identify the load of interest or the part or area you think is acting up. 4, do a circuit analysis on those parts or the load of interest. And 5, formulate the troubleshooting hypothesis. Any questions so far?
No, very good, very good. Please continue.
Okay, so step 6 is to identify the electrical measurements to confirm the hypothesis and the expected reading for those measurements. So, of course, you use your multimeter. You're either going to test the voltage, resistance, continuity with ohms, with the resistance, or the amp draw. So that's step 6. You're actually going to do the testing. When you look at a schematic, you'll see dots where wires or circuits meet, and those are called electric equivalent points. So step 7 is to identify those electric equivalent points, or EEPs, as we call them, at which to make the electrical measurements. So oftentimes on a control board, you'll see an empty spot that looks like solder that you can actually test, and it'll be identified on the schematic with that dot, like I said. Step 8 is to perform the electrical measurements. I know it seems like maybe a little too many steps just to get to the point, but each step's crucial. So step 8 is to perform the measurement, and then step 9 is to compare the electrical measurements with the expected readings or specs. Step 10 is to make the repair and then check the operation. So even if I suspect it's a bad drain pump on a washer or a dishwasher, and it's something I've seen 1,000 times, I'll still oftentimes take my voltmeter out and test that drain pump is getting the voltage it needs to drain, but it's not doing its job. So I will identify where that load is on the schematic. If I can test it from the control board to see that the control board's outputting to the drain pump without having to take the whole thing apart, I'll do that.
Okay, that leads to the question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that leads to the question, Kevin. What are the reasons for these failures? What causes them? Is it operator error? Is the operator doing something that the manual says, whatever you do, don't do this? Or is it substandard manufacturing? Is it poor design? What is the number one cause of appliance failures? Kevin's in Florida, and he is an appliance repair technician. He has his own shingle out. He's in business for himself. And he's teaching us about appliance repairs and ways to approach the diagnostics and figure out what's wrong with your appliance. So, generally speaking, Kevin, we're talking about refrigerators, freezers, washers, dryers, dishwashers, garbage disposals, the whole enchilada. What is the general reason for the failures? Is it operator errors? Is it design problems? Is it poor quality manufacturing? What do you think it is?
Well, maintenance plays a good portion of that. I think people could use cleaning tablets to clean their washers and dishwashers and kind of follow the ideas that they provide in the manuals to leave the doors open and not overload the machine. But really, who's got time to do that, though? I mean, most people have large families and they wash clothes at least every other day, and the load sizes are, pretty decent. So quite often I'll see suspension go bad on washing machines, that can be attributed to overloading. But I think substandard engineering is the main problem. I do see pretty common parts that I carry in my stock go bad, and the only reason I can see, why these parts would go bad within 5 years is because they weren't built to last.
Okay. So when you mentioned the washing machine, I believe you did, what I do when I wash clothes, I'm not allergic to washing clothes. What I do is I set it to the smallest load level, fill the washer up to that level, and the agitator, it's an agitator type washer, and it starts agitating. And just before it started agitating, I've put in the dry powdered laundry detergent. Then, and that's so that I mix the laundry detergent with the water. Then I add the clothes and set it to a higher level. And I always set the water level higher than the minimum level that would be required for that load. So what I'm saying is I use more water. Now, some people might say that I'm wasting water. Other people might say that it's easier to swish those clothes around in the machine if there's more water to swish them around in, and it's easier on the motor, the transmission, and everything else. What are your thoughts about the way I do it, Kevin?
I think that's a great way to do it. I think a lot of people are quite surprised when they buy a new high-efficient washing machine and there's hardly any water soaking their clothes. People will call me out and say, it's not filling up and something's wrong. Unfortunately, that's the way it's designed. And somehow this is going to save you money, even though the machine's probably going to break in 5 years and you're going to have to buy a new one. I don't see how that's efficient for the environment or the customer.
Right. I'm with you. And so I'm willing to use more water and have less wear and tear per use of the machine. Now, I understand, Kevin, that with these high efficiency, and I think that's a misnomer when they call these high efficiency, because sometimes you have to wash the clothes twice to get enough water in there. But my understanding is that they are designed to work with a minimum pressure from the, we'll call it the faucet or the water supply, that if you have a well, you might not have the 40 pounds of pressure to operate that new washing machine, and you may not get enough water. Is that correct or not?
That's true. That's true. They used to rely mostly on float switches or pressure sensors to determine when it was full. Some of them actually just go on timers on the computer board processors now.
Okay, so what it sounds to me like what the engineers did was somebody said, you know what, we don't have to have that extra switch in there, that pressure sensor that tells the water level, as it rises in the tub, for example. We don't need that mechanical device that with a diaphragm and a hose that senses the water level. We can just do it by a timer. But everybody's water pressure is different. If you have a well, that's different from if you live at the lowest point in your city where, all that water is pushing down on your washing machine. So you'd have more pressure if you lived at the lowest point. So I think that's a silly idea. But, just changing a few lines of code in the program on the control board is cheaper than adding that pressure sensor or that level sensor or that water level sensor. We'll be right back. Kevin's with us in Florida. Kevin, when I wanted to buy a bulldozer, I called Joey in Michigan. I said, Joey, I'm thinking about buying a bulldozer. You have any suggestions? And he said, oh, yeah. Here are some models that you ought to consider. Here are the price points. Here's what makes them good. Here's what you need to avoid. He gave me the whole laundry list of who, what, when, where, why, and how, that should go into my decision. Do you find people, ask you for your advice as to what they should buy before they start looking, or do they just make uninformed bad decisions?
I get that question a lot, actually. About 10% of the time, the appliance isn't worth repairing. And so I'll often recommend a Whirlpool brand, Maytag, Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Roper, Amana. They've got a couple others. And I'll have to add a caveat that there are certain models, such as the French doors with the French door refrigerators with the middle drawer that's actually another door with another gasket. We've seen a lot of problems with these. The idea of a refrigerator is called a sealed system. It completely relies on being its own environment on the inside and not letting any warm air or moisture in from the outside. I know that sounds quite obvious, but cars and households don't quite work the same way. They're not completely sealed off like a refrigerator should be. So when you have refrigerators like that, there's just more room for error, more room for air to come in. But anyways, so people do ask me that a lot before they go out and buy a new one. And I always say, you know, if you have any questions when you're shopping around, just give me a call.
That's wonderful. Okay. So the takeaway class is really simple based on what I heard Kevin say. And that is the more doors, the worse the design in terms of efficiency, in terms of freedom from repair. Next question, Kevin. So I was buying something that required a title in the good old days when, before the Corona panic. And so the seller, which was on Craigslist, the seller said, well, come on in the kitchen, we'll fill out the paperwork. I said, okay, great. So I'm in the kitchen, and there were these bright, brand new washer and dryer set front load. And it was a small kitchen, and the housewife said, listen, just walk around that door. We have to leave that door open because otherwise we get mold in the washer. So what a dumb idea, to have, number one, put the washer and dryer in the kitchen where you have to leave the door open and walk around it whenever you're in the kitchen. I mean, that's ridiculous. Number two is that you have to have the door open that's in the way in the front. It's like leaving a base cabinet door open. It would be in the way. Well, when I leave, when I'm done with the washing machine, I leave the lid open. It's not in anybody's way. What are your thoughts about that mold, the problem for mold, and what to do about it, and this design with the front door? What are your thoughts?
Most people don't ever want to go back to a front load washer after they've had one. And once the mold starts on the door gasket, it is really hard to get rid of it. You can scrub and you can use bleach and baking soda. It's just really hard to get rid of it. And you end up having to replace the door gasket, which again is another $100 to $200 part.
Yeah, I know a gal that had to have one. I know a gal that had to have one of those front load washers, and it plagued her because it would walk. It was one of the early models, and she had to be an early adopter of this idiotic technology. And when it would spin, it would walk away from the wall. And the only way to fix it in her world was to buy another front load washer, which is just compounding the problem. Have you seen those kinds of problems?
Yes, and that gets back to the overloading it according to the manufacturer's suggestion and the shocks getting off balance. Oh, here's a tip. If you do have a front loader and you notice a wobble when the basket spins compared to the tub, you might want to stop making your loads as big because the support that attaches that basket through the tub to the motor is fractured, and it's only going to get worse. And you probably don't even need to call an appliance repairman at that point, because once that basket starts to wobble and that support's fractured, the repair is going to be at least $500, and you might as well kiss it goodbye. I find a lot of people, with limited space will take a front load washer and a dryer and stack the dryer on top. And they've got a kit to secure it to the washer and everything. And of course they've got to match and look nice and everything. However, I often have to turn those repairs down because, much like other appliance repairmen, I'm a one-man band, and I'm not going to take that dryer off by myself to get to the washing machine, take the top panel of the washer off. That's mostly how it's done. And oftentimes the customer doesn't have the strength or capability to help me take that dryer off. If I have to hire another guy to come out just to take the dryer off, I've got to charge them, quite a bit more. So think about that before you put a dryer on top of your washing machine, folks.
So, Kevin, have you found that people have said to you, I kind of wish I never bought this front load washer, and I really'd like to have my old one back, that they bought because they wanted the new, candy apple red front load washer and dryer, or stainless steel, or what? Did they buy it for aesthetic reasons? Did they get these new appliances for aesthetic reasons rather than replacing something that was really old and just flat out worn out? What makes them do these stupid things?
Yes. Yeah, they absolutely buy it for aesthetic reasons. Oftentimes people will get their whole kitchens remodeled, and Lowe's or Home Depot will sell them a package deal of the same brand, but it's usually inferior products compared to the other models that they have, and they're just trying to liquidate them. Quite often, more than any other appliance, people say they're never going back to the front loader, and I wish I didn't give my kids the old Kenmore Whirlpool set that we had. They've been running fine. They've never even been repaired. And they say, I'm going to go get one of those analog old school ones with just the knobs. Well, unfortunately, they're very hard to find, especially new.
You mentioned $200 for an appliance repair. I got to tell you, Kevin, I would be hard pressed to spend $200 on a washing machine because, I used to find them for $50, maybe $75, maybe $100. So I bought, maybe 3 of them. I bought 3 washers, all with the same transmission, all in, not exactly the same, but I could cannibalize them, and they are the Whirlpool design. And the reason is, the last thing I want to do is have to buy a brand new washer that would last 5 years. I don't want to do it. So I bought a lifetime supply of used washing machines.
Well, that's what makes you Dumbledore of USA Prepares. Having what you need before you need it.
Well, that's what preparedness is, right? What else would you'd like to share with us in the appliance world and do-it-yourself repairs and maintenance? Well,
I might finish off the pressure switch thing regarding the washing machine, because that might be a simple repair that somebody could run into one day. Take, for example, the older direct drive styles that you and I both have and will probably always have because they're the most reliable. Quite often, if that gets off balance, if the tub gets off balance, it can rub the pressure switch tube up against the inner body, and it can put a little tiny hole in that pressure switch tube, and that's enough to make that pressure switch lose its pressure, which tells it to stop filling, and then it overflows the tub. And you don't know until it actually happens. That's one of the downsides to the direct drive washers. So if it starts getting off balance quite a bit, folks, just take care of the suspension before the problem gets worse. On the other hand, an upside to the more advanced ones is they do still have that pressure switch tube, which basically just acts as a safeguard so that you don't overflow the tub and flood your house. So it doesn't tell it necessarily how much water's in there. It just tells it, when we're not getting any pressure, just start draining. So if your washer is just constantly draining for no reason, that's probably the issue, is that pressure switch tube. And usually you can take your model number, type it into Google, add pressure switch tube to the end of that, and find the part pretty quickly. You might just want to, if you're getting that issue, it's just constantly draining for no reason, I don't know why, go ahead and order that pressure switch tube. It might be $10, but that's a very simple repair that anybody could take care of.
Yeah, and I would think that if you absolutely had to in a emergency situation, you could wrap it tightly with electrical tape to, if there was a small hole in it, to cover up that hole, right?
Well, I'd probably choose something more like a strong adhesive or a rubber cement or something, because it is a lot of pressure. However, I can't take that risk. The one time I had to file a claim with my insurance company for business, is due to a Whirlpool refrigerator water valve that lost the compression of the tube that it was going in, spit the tube out, flooded this guy's floor, just a small portion, and he got $10,000 out of the insurance company. Anybody who's got a business and has ever filed a claim knows that they never want to do it again, because then it makes your rates double. I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, there are.
That's a good point.
There's some risky things when it comes to water out there. Don't want to do too much damage.
Two things that I have on my list for today, Kevin. One is the fill valve solenoids. So these are the valves on a washing machine, I'm talking about an agitator type now, clothes washer. So you've got the hot water fill valve and the cold water fill valve. And usually at least I think the cold water fill valve fails first. But you could always put hot water, in the washer. Or you could switch the hoses, switch the hot and cold, and then set the washing machine to hot, which really means cold, and keep going. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a way around that problem. I can't say that I see one go bad quicker than the other. I actually don't have to replace valves that often, and often they'll corrode and they'll leak through the top of the solenoid. Mm-hmm. If you have a small leak that's constant, even when the washer is turned off, it's most likely that valve. So you want to locate that valve and just take a look at it. The tricky thing about valves is it can still have the correct resistance electrically, but still be faulty because of debris in the water line. You may also want to, if it's a washing machine, you may also want to take off the hose and look at the screen that goes into the valve. Sometimes you can take those out and clean them.
Right. And typically when they get plugged up, that would be with scale or lime, right? There's stainless steel screens inside, right where the hose connects to the washer. There's a little screen. It's convex. So it's an outward type of a screen, and it's about the size of a finger, the tip of a finger, and they get plugged up. So a toothbrush and some vinegar ought to fix that right away. We'll be right back. I've got a question about dishwasher drain hose. Kevin's with us, and he's in Florida, and we're talking about appliances. He's probably the youngest instructor we have here at USA Prepares. Kevin, we talked about fill valve solenoids. I bought a fill valve set. It's an assembly. It's about $12. Any comments on fill valves before I ask my next question?
No. Well, actually, one way you could test a valve is to take an old 120 power cord that comes off of, a small appliance or something you throw away, cut it off, and attach some wire harnesses to the ends of each of the leads. And you can actually, if you know what you're doing and you're careful, you can actually plug those harnesses into the water valve and then plug that cord into the wall. Again, be very careful not to touch the metal or anything conductive. And you can actually test that valve by providing it with power on its own. That's one way to test them. That's about all I got on water valves.
Okay. So, class, here's a real serious question I have for Kevin, and this is about your health and safety. And it relates to automatic dishwashers, those ones under the counter. So here's the question. So when I installed ours, obviously I hooked it up to electricity. I had the cabinet, I sized the cabinet so it would fit right in there. I secured it and all those things. I insulated the hot water pipe so it wouldn't lose heat. But the drain hose that comes out of the dishwasher, I routed into the next cabinet over, which is the sink-based cabinet where we have a double bowl kitchen sink, stainless steel, just like most of you have. And I routed that dishwasher drain hose all the way up to the bottom, the underside of the counter. So it's at the highest level under the kitchen cabinet that it could be. So the drain starts at the bottom of the dishwasher, goes through a hole in the cabinets, from one cabinet from the dishwasher cabinet to the sink base cabinet. And then it goes straight up, and it's secured to the underside of the counter at the highest level. And then it goes back down to the Y pipe for the sink drain. And the reason I did that was to prevent as much cross-connect of bacteria from the sink drain going back into the dishwasher. Kevin, your thoughts on doing that?
That is the only way to do it. You're supposed to have the drain hose go up to the height of the dishwasher so that gravity takes care of the rest and it doesn't backflow back into the dishwasher. If it does backflow into the dishwasher, you may have a bad check valve, depending on the model. But you may also want to check that the drain hose is raised enough. It's still going to leave some water in the bottom of the dishwasher, same with a washing machine, so it doesn't corrode and dry up the seals. I also recommend occasionally using a fresh cleaning tablets, or you can use baking soda if you want to make your own mixture. But I do find the fresh tablets are worth the money. So yes, you're right on that. I want to add one more thing before I go. I've been wanting to talk about living without appliances because I probably, more than anyone else, get to see what people look like whenever they don't have one of their appliances in their lives for, up to a week or so. And oftentimes, as we would assume, people aren't prepared. So, go ahead and buy an extra appliance. If you've got the space to store it, you've got some extra cash, go ahead and buy one. It would be a really good idea just in case a part of your living arrangement, your system goes down. Buy an extra clothesline to dry your clothes. If you can find a washboard, maybe go and buy a washboard. You don't need the dishwasher. You don't need the microwave, but you definitely need that refrigerator nowadays. So, freeze any extra food that you have. As a survivalist and a prepper, your job is to have redundancy on all of your stock and all of your equipment. You have the extra parts you need. I know a lot of this should go without saying for our class, but we just have to reiterate it because people just let their clothes pile up and let their food, rot in coolers because they don't have that backup. They don't know how to go ahead and can or go ahead and use a dehydrator to take care of that food before it spoils. So, just be prepared for one of your appliances to break within a year or so.
Yeah, and I would think the number one would be the refrigeration. So, yep, we've got a spare refrigerator. Yeah, we really do. And it's a used one, and it's got to be, maybe 25 or 30 years old. It's ready to go. It's ready to go. Kevin, when we store a used refrigerator, like let's say in the garage, do you recommend keeping it closed, keeping that gasket closed, or keeping it open a little bit to prevent mold? What's the best way to do that?
Keep it open with a cloth in there. Make sure it gets dried up, and also do the Vaseline tip that you have. Put a little Vaseline around the gasket.
Kevin, can you come back again?
I'd love to, Vincent. Thank you for having me so often.
Oh, you're welcome. Let's do it in a couple of weeks. Kevin in Florida, our appliance technician, instructor. Thanks so much, Kevin. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Repairs. Cathy's with us in Ohio. We're going to be talking about tips for the family. And I just have a quick comment about something that is not being reported. And it's important for all of you to know this. So not widely reported is another kind of quiet protest that city governments do not want you to know is happening. Okay, so from their homes and apartments and offices, people are flushing down the toilets non-biodegradable fabrics, diapers, string, balloons, etc. They're going down the toilets into the city sewage system. Now, there's a big screen that prevents these objects from going into and clogging the secondary treatment. And these objects, because they don't biodegrade like toilet paper and human waste, and ground up babies from hospitals, those kinds of things, and body parts, they will clog up the screen. And there's only one way to unclog the screen. So someone goes down there with a mask and a suit and like a wetsuit and a respirator and hand tools and removes all this debris from the screen. Because if it does not get removed, the sewage system will back up. And it'll go backward from where it came. So that means into apartment buildings and businesses and government offices. So this quiet protest that is happening, that is not being discussed, because if people knew that this was actually having impact on the government, it might get worse. So I'm telling you for your benefit that if it continues, it will get worse. And what used to happen is the government sewage systems would clean out these screens once a month. Now it's every 3 days. And if they don't clean it out every 3 days, if those people get sick and they don't show up to work and they don't clean out these big screens, and these are huge, these are like room-sized screens. If they don't continue to clean them out, the sewage will back up into the state buildings, the city buildings, the county buildings, the town buildings, your apartment, your house if you're on the city water and sewer system. And people will not be able to go to work because of the health hazards. So I just wanted to tell you this is happening and you need to know about it. I'm not advocating making this worse. I'm just telling you that you need to be prepared that if this happens to your house or your apartment, you may need to vacate. Any comments, Cathy, before we talk about your tips?
Well, that's very good to know, Vince, because, boy, you'd really have a problem with raw sewage. I don't know how you could disinfect things other than bleach, and that's if you can bleach it. What about appliances in your furnace and your hot water heater?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cathy, I once visited a home. I was asked, hey, come on over. I got to show you this. And it was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And it was a home of a family. And this guy had to have me see his secret location where he stored his food, his water. It was safe from protest in terms of flying projectiles. And so I said, I'd love to see the bathroom. He showed me the bathroom, and there's the tub and the toilet and the sink. And he lived in a neighborhood, and he brought all this material into his basement, and he was not the highest on the hill. He was not the lowest, but he was down the hill. And I said, so when the sewage system fails, how are you going to stop the sewage from filling up your bathtub, which was the lowest sewage device in his home? So he had a bathtub in the house, and the bathtub drain was the lowest point. That's what would fill up first with a backflow of sewage. And he didn't know that. And I said, well, I suggest you get some drain plugs, those rubber stoppers that will fit the tub. And then you have to plug up the overflow, the overflow drain, I should say, in the tub. And then you need to be able to plug up the toilet so sewage doesn't backflow up from the toilet. And then the highest point would be the sink in that basement bathroom. So, class, what I'm telling you is absolutely real. So if you think that sewage might not be a problem, yeah, it might be. And I told you why. Because people are flushing down the toilets these masks and diapers and hoses and everything you can think of that's not biodegradable. And it's clogging up the screen. And just the first thing that clogs up the screen reduces the outflow of the sewage into the sewage treatment plant. And then the second thing makes it worse. And then more clogging items make it easier for the subsequent items to clog the screen. It's a real big problem. Really big. So those of you who live on, your own property with a septic system, you don't have that problem unless you create it for yourself. So, feminine products, they clog up the system. Diapers, everything you can think of that people flush down the drain that does not biodegrade is a problem. Okay, Cathy, where would you like to start?
Vince, could I start on a couple observations that I have seen in the past week or so first?
You bet. You bet.
Okay. What I am seeing is, and hearing from people that I've talked to, is there still aren't appliances available in a lot of areas. Small appliances are not available. Bikes are in short supply. It just seems like what you have said from the very beginning, that this is just keeps spreading. I do have to tell you that I did go out yesterday. I babysat for my daughter, and they had a couple houses in the neighborhood that were having moving sales, and I got a brand new, well-built bread machine with a sticker still on it for $150 for $10. I thought I have one, but I thought of what you said a couple weeks ago about they're hard to find. And I got a set of the Henkel knife with the block. It's a 15-piece set, which I believe is anywhere from $150 to maybe $250 for $5. So I'm kind of on the lookout for things that I need, but what I'm observing, like I did go to a few stores, I needed some things, and I thought, okay, I will just peek in some of these. I went into a Home Goods, and they probably had a third of what they normally have. There were literally empty shelves in the first half of the store. There was barely anything on them, and everything was spread out. So that tells me they're obviously not able to get supplies. The other observation I made was I wanted to get like socks and T-shirts for my sons and my husband, and the one store literally had 5 packages of T-shirts, none of which was the right size for what we needed. And then the other one, when the sock department, they maybe had 6 or 8 packs of socks hanging on the hook. And there just wasn't, I don't know if I'm just timing it wrong when I go, but there really isn't much in that area. There's some areas where they still have clothing and things like that. I'm not seeing too much of a shortage in that, but those are the things I'm observing. The other thing I'm not finding is like pastas, and like especially spaghetti is in short supply. There's still areas when you go in the store, like the whole thing is still just almost bare or bare. Some of the things are coming back slowly. The paper products, I've seen those come back. But I guess really what I'd like to maybe get people to do is to really think about what they're seeing and maybe critically think. Just like what you said, like with the bread machine. If I have a backup bread machine, I can supply us with bread myself. If I have backup, like your last instructor, a backup refrigerator, if something goes wrong with the first one, I can still survive. And I guess at this point, now with all these riots, I just wonder how much longer that's going to back everything up. So I guess that's kind of what I wanted to do, was really think about what we're seeing, and if we can project 4 to 6 months down the road, like we're in the summer now, but what about in the fall? What kinds of things are we going to need in the fall? One of the little tips that I wanted to say was, I have a cousin who told me that she found ball canning lid jars, lids at the dollar store for $1 last year. And she said it was in the middle to end of summer. So I just want to let people know maybe to keep their eyes open if they happen to get them, if they go into that store just to maybe try to find them. That might be availability. But she found them out when she was shopping. So I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say, was I just not really finding the shelves really full yet. And I think appliances and bikes and hardware, some tools and stuff are just really in short supply. And electronics was in short supply. So that's where I saw, and greenhouses too. Greenhouses, I poked in a few. I have quite a few around me. little farmer greenhouses, and there's absolutely no vegetables left. They're just totally gone. She said as soon as they get anything, it just goes. And I can't find any seeds anymore either. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. And then after that, I do have some things that for planting a garden or even like some food substitution things like in this situation. I have some ideas and tips that I have done throughout the years that I can maybe go into that also.
Okay. So, Cathy, I believe I heard on the top of the hour news something that sounded like the president saying that 2021 will be one of the best ever, like the best year ever. He said a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense to me lately, and I think is one of them. So if I were playing the stock market, I would short that stock if it were available, that 2021 is going to be one of the best years ever, because I absolutely flat out don't believe it. Cathy, you mentioned T-shirts. That was something, T-shirts, underwear, those kinds of things I was very concerned about, and I saw this coming for years. That's a very significant point. Next, the point that you made, Henkel knives. Now, that's a German brand. Now, it doesn't mean they're made in Germany anymore, but it's an old, fabulous, top-of-the-line brand. Those are probably all made in China, in the last 20 years or so. But $5 for a set of those knives, what a great bargain. And the bread maker, the well-built bread maker, $10. What a great way to go. So, class, I suggest you pay attention to what Cathy's doing and try to emulate that and replicate that and duplicate that. We'll be right back. Cathy's with us, and I have a couple quick comments based on what she said. So if you end up buying a used bread maker, and I bought them at the junk store, and I probably paid 50% more, about $15, but yeah, you can get them for $10 or $15. People don't understand how good they are, how important they are, but if you get a used one, make sure that the baking dish, that the shaft of the bread kneading paddles spins freely. If not, you can lubricate it from the top and the bottom with plain old vegetable oil. So put some on there, spin it a little bit, put some more on there, spin it a little bit. You can use a toothpick, clean toothpick to transfer the vegetable oil from whatever teaspoon you're going to use to that precise location of the shaft and the bearing of the shaft on the bread baking dish. That's number one. Now, why would you do that? Because if you don't, and it is stuck, you'll burn out the motor, and you'll ruin it, and you might not be able to get another bread making machine. So that's one thought. And extending food extenders, food substitutions. Last night for dinner, I made some Manischewitz split pea soup. It's a dried split pea soup. It comes in a bag, and I don't think they put enough split peas in there. So I added another half a pound of split peas to the pot that I was cooking the soup in. And then I found some sliced pepperoni that came from Sam's Club pizzas. I bought 6 of them and cut them up and put them in freezer bags. I cut them into 4. So the 16-inch pizza is in 4 slices. I put 3 of those slices in a gallon freezer bag. I took the pepperoni off, put that in a separate freezer bag, and so I have a bag of pepperoni slices. I added 4 of those pepperoni slices into the soup mix and simmered it, boiled it and simmered it. I added a half a teaspoon of crushed red pepper, a little more powdered onion, and a little more black pepper. And it was extraordinary, and I had it again for breakfast. So when I make something like that, I will heat it up. I'll make plenty. And then it goes in the refrigerator, and we use that pre-cooked food for subsequent meals. Cathy, your comments on what I just said?
Oh, I do the same thing, Vince. The great tip on the bread machine, the paddle, I'm glad you said that, because there does get crusty stuff down in there. And if it gets stuck on there, then, yeah, you're right. You can really damage your machine. But like I do the same thing with if I'm making chili. I actually have a recipe for it's called 3-bean chili. So I use 3 different kinds of beans. So I can just add a little bit more. If you want to add meat to it, fine. If you don't, if you're short on meat, it's very filling to do exactly what you're saying.
And here's an interesting thing, class. Here's an interesting thing. So yesterday I was giving water to the chickens, and I use a gallon jug that originally contained cranberry juice from the supermarket. Well, we don't throw those away. And the reason we don't throw those away is I don't know if I'm ever going to get another one. So I'm really careful about how I handle it. I actually treasure the things that we have now because I don't know if I can get another bread machine, another refrigerator. I don't know if I can get any more Freon. I don't know if I can get another hard drive for a computer. I don't know. So I'm taking extra care with everything that I touch. Clothing, we talked about washing clothes inside and out, blue jeans, zipping up the zipper so you don't wear out the fabric faster, the abrasion of the zipper. Why not lessen all that? Because you may not be able to get those clothing items. We may, I guess the term is commando. We may be going around commando, meaning no underwear. No kidding. This can happen. And one more thing, as these riots continue, businesses may not open. Chicago is pleading with the Chinese factory outlet, don't move out of town just because we burned down your store. Please don't, stay with us. And Walmart's saying at the highest level, we got to be nuts to be in Chicago. Okay. So what about cash? What about burning down banks? Do you think that might happen? Well, if you do, then you might want to get some cash. Get it out of the bank, not all of it, but enough so that you can trade those Federal Reserve notes for things that you want to buy, as Cathy did at this moving sale. And people are moving. People are terrified. And rightfully so. We'll be right back. Cathy's with us in Ohio, and we're talking about tips. I just want to share this. Mrs. Finelli just told me that a compressor for a Mercedes-Benz, for a 20-year-old Mercedes-Benz, a real common part number, made by Denso, which is Nippon Denso. It used to be Japanese, now it's made in China. $350. We bought one, 6 months ago for $190. So it's almost doubled in price. So here's the quick tip. So for those of you who have auto air conditioning systems that have failed, you might want to get it fixed soon, or fix it yourself soon, before the price goes up even higher, because the parts come from China. Okay? That's number one. And if you've got one that's working great, hose off with a garden hose. Carefully hose off your radiator and your air conditioning condenser under the hood. Condenser's right behind the radiator. It's the aluminum fin device. Okay? Right behind the radiator, or in front of the radiator. Okay? Hose that off. And the same thing for your air conditioning unit outside. The outside unit. Get the leaves and debris off it so it works easier, so your compressor will last longer, and you can hose off those fins. Cathy, please continue.
Okay, Vince, I wanted to make a few suggestions for people that they can substitute these if they can't find them in the store. I was looking for plant steaks, and I couldn't find the ones I normally bought, so I looked around the house, and we use 2-gallon jugs of peroxide for our well and our water system. We don't put it in our well, but for our water system. And the plastic is very thick on there. And so I started cutting it, and I think they're called Weiss scissors. They're real heavy-duty scissors. And it was really hard to cut. This plastic is probably a good maybe 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch thick. So my husband cut the bottom off of the jugs for me, and he used a bandsaw, and he made like 1.25 inch steaks, like plant steaks, about maybe 8-10 inches long. And then I took the scissors and made a point on them. And what's nice about it is you can write on them with like a Sharpie, but if you happen to step on them or back up or kneel, they bend. And so they're reusable. So I just write on there the whatever it is, whether it's a orange pepper, green pepper. But I use like 5 or 6 of those jugs, and I probably have 100 of these steaks now that I don't have to go out and buy, and they're expensive anyway. So that is really, if you can, and if you don't have those kind of jugs, I would suggest try to get anything white, like your bleach bottles or things like that. If you have any, maybe cleaning product bottles, maybe like from Simple Green or something like that, that plastic is a little thicker, and you can write on it. So that's a tip that you can use for plant steaks. It's just made my life a lot easier because I can identify everything in my garden now without running out of steaks.
What a great idea. What a great idea.
Yeah.
My mom did something sort of like that, and she would use plastic spoons that people would throw away. You know, you get at a restaurant or, you know, takeout when people used to, you know, do that. So she'd save the spoons and the knives, and she would write on them. It used to drive me crazy because they would mess me up when I was using the rototiller, you know, coming after her, you know, after she planted all these spoons and forks, because she'd write on them with a Sharpie. I like your idea. It's a great way to go. So, yeah.
I'll take them out in the fall. Now, if I might try to use alcohol and erase it, or something but if it's just the variety and I use it anyway, I'll just save them and reuse them next year. The other thing I wanted to mention was tomato cages. We had a little bit of a conversation about that, but I was at a farm store like 10 years ago, and they had these super heavy-duty tomato cages, and they were probably like $9 or $10 at the time. I still have them, and I'm still using them, but they're like 5-rung tie, and they're really thick. They're not flimsy like the other kind. But what I do is I take a piece of conduit, and I have my husband cut it the size that I need. If it's a small item, I can pound that in the ground, and then I can tie my pepper, if it's like, let's say it starts to get top heavy or something, and I can tie it I use old shoelaces. And what I do is I double bow them, and then you can reuse them every year. And I just make sure when you tie your plants, don't tie them real tight. You got to give them room to move. Like, you don't want to choke them off like real tight. At least give them a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and make a loop and knot it if you have to. But I use a double bow, and I save all my old shoelaces. Now, if I run out of them, then I use twine or something. But I can adjust it then. If the plant starts to grow and I need to move it, then I just untie the double bow, and then I move the shoelace around. But I take the conduit, and I put it in the ground, and if my tomato cage starts to get heavy, then I'll take a cable tie, and I will cable tie the conduit to the tomato cage, and it gives it extra support. Sometimes I need 2 of them, one on each side, because that way then I've had some tomato cages, I've had so much tomatoes on there, they just start leaning over. And you can use conduit over again too. I just have a bucket out in my pole barn, and I put all my steaks in there. You can use rebar if you have pieces of rebar. You can use, if it's something small, then, you know, any kind of a little dowel or a stake or something, if you have some of those around, you can use those for staking. I stake my peppers a lot once they start getting produce on them, because I've had the wind blow them over and crack them, or the dog gets into the garden sometimes and she'll pull them. But if I have them staked, then typically they don't break over and fall over and break off and everything. But the tomato cages, don't buy the flimsy ones. They're just not going to hold up. You're better off using some kind of post or something like that. Or like I said, I use conduit. That holds up pretty well. These 2 of that's pretty cheap. So,
Cathy, I assume when you say conduit, I assume you're talking about 1/2 inch by 10 feet long electric metal conduit that's available if you go to Home Depot. I just checked the price, $2.99 each if you buy 10 of them. So for $30, you'll have 100 feet of 1/2-inch conduit, and you cut that off to the length that you want with a hacksaw or a bandsaw or something, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I have some pieces that I want shorter ones for smaller plants, and I cut it. I cut some off to maybe 18 inches, and then I have some that are 5-6 feet for the tomatoes, maybe 7 feet. I pound them. I wait till it rains real good, and then I pound them in. And if you don't want them to like get flattened on the top, sometimes some steaks I don't want, I'll take a block and I'll put a block on the top, and then I'll take like a mallet or a hammer, because you will kind of like sometimes split some of the things open, or you can break like some of your steaks by doing that. Now you won't with like rebar or something like that. But yeah, that's what I do.
You're talking about swedging.
I take cable ties, and that really, they're not going to go anywhere with the cable ties. And then I just cut those off at the end of the year, but then I reuse the conduit year after year. So when you make these conduit steaks, do you put the end, let's say 2 inches of the end, into a vise and turn the vise and squeeze the end together so it's easier to pound into the ground, or you just leave it the way it comes when you cut it off with a hole in the end? Well, your way is probably better than the way I'm doing, Vince. I've never thought about it that way. I probably should do that. I pound them in the ground, but I think I may have changed my mind and do it the way you're doing. I wait till like I get a good rain. Like you can get them started, and sometimes like, let's say you get a real heavy thunderstorm, then go out after the storm and see how far down you can get your conduit until you really feel like it's sturdy, or just water that area good if you need to get them in. But you know, the tomato plants aren't going to be that big right now, but I kind of get everything set up and get those in there. The other thing I want to mention is if you have to transplant something, one of the things that the plants do is they go into what is called transplant shock. And let's say you're taking seedlings out, or you have a plant in an area and you need to dig it out and move it. It just can't stay there. The biggest thing that I can recommend is, if you have to dig it out, try to get enough of the root ball and put it in a pot, and maybe have a saucer on the bottom so that it has a little bit of moisture there. Don't let it dry out, because once you move something, unless it's like March or something and it's cold, the plant can do much better at that time. But I'll either put it in the shade, I'll put it in a protected area. If it's super hot, I may put it in the garage or in the pole barn with the door open or something, to just keep it out of the sun. But once you go to put it in your next spot that you're going to do, see if you can do it like at the end of the day. And then if it's hot, like we're going to get close to 90 degrees today. So if I had to transplant something, I would try to wait. But let's say I can't. It's just got to get in the ground, you just got to have to do it. You water the area really well, and you water it once you put it in the ground. But like, I save old screens and screening material, and I will maybe like loop the screen over the plant to protect it. Or you could even take like a milk crate, because you got protection a little bit from the sun, or you could put the screening over it with a brick on the top. But when I start some of my lettuce and things, when it first comes up, I'll take an old screen and I'll put if it can't be on the ground, I'll put a couple bricks on the end of the screen underneath, and then put a brick on top on the ends, like where the frame is, and that protects it from that hot sun beating down on it. So a lot of people lose plants when they transplant them, because you just can't take most plants, and move it in this kind of heat. And so I figured, as long as we're trying to save our plants, then that's something that people don't think about. You could take an old sheet. One of the things I made the mistake last year, we had some 100-degree days, and my tomatoes lost all their blossoms. And I did a little research, and what I should have done was taken like white sheets and covered them from the sun in the heat of the day, because it was just so hot that the leaves curled and the blossoms dried up, even though they were well watered. So that's a tip too. If it's really, really hot and you can somehow rig something up to block the sun off of it, or you have pieces of plywood you can prop up or something just to keep sun off of some plants that are really struggling. And you can tell because in the heat of the day, the leaves will curl. And some people think, oh, it needs water. And sometimes it does, but sometimes it's from the leaves, the plant's trying to protect itself from the heat. And they'll just literally curl in until the sun gets off of them, and then they'll open back up.
Yeah, and the immediate response when that happens, class, is add water, but not freezing cold water and not chlorinated water. You should have the water ready, and you can store that in those old soda bottles from when you used to drink soda. You might still have a few of those around. Very great advice from Cathy. We'll be right back. Cathy's with us in Ohio. Cathy, I have a semi-personal question to ask you. If you don't want to answer it, feel free to say, I'm not going to answer that. But here's the question. You've mentioned your husband a number of times, and my question for you is, are you and your husband of a similar mindset regarding home economics, preparation, what to buy, what not to buy, when to do things? Do you make decisions together? Is that who you are? Do you make decisions together? Do you talk about what you're going to do? Do you work together? If you don't want to answer it, you don't have to.
Oh, yeah, we really are. We both grew up in the same type of economic situation where we didn't have much. My husband's a do-it-yourselfer. He was a mechanic. He can do just about everything. He used to be in the trades for building. He does plumbing. Very seldom do we ever call anybody out, maybe for the air conditioning for Freon, that type of thing now, because he doesn't have everything that he wants. But we do. We work together, and I've been trying to help him, and I'm trying to learn. I did help him with the air conditioning unit where we took off the sides. I wanted to watch and see how he did that. So I'm trying to learn, because that's not my forte, but we think a lot, and he helps me when I have my little projects. He made bluebird houses for me and things like that. So we are.
That's wonderful, nice. And that's the same way it is here at our farm. I've said that I would not buy a quart of paint for the house without Mrs. Finelli's involvement in the decision. And if she said, I don't know if I like that color or not, we're not going to do it. And the reason is it's half her money. It's half her life. It's not all mine. It's half hers. And I wouldn't dare force my thoughts on her. And when it comes to picking up that heavy board, she's got the other half. She's holding it up with me. When it comes to siding, she's holding up the siding. We're putting it on together. We're on the scaffold together. When we're spackling walls and painting, we're on the scaffold and ladders, working together. That's the way it is. And I think it's wonderful that you and your husband do things that same way, with that same mindset. And class, that's what it's going to take. Honestly, it's going to take that. It's actually, we're going backwards, and it's not all bad, this corona panic. It's not all bad. There is some good. The good is that the family's getting closer together. And with forced economics, where people have lost jobs and are not coming back, the children might be moving in with the parents and the grandparents and living as a productive family unit, all working together. I love that aspect of it. I really do. I'm sorry we have to do it this way and for these reasons, but I really love the fact that families are getting closer together. Cathy, what else do you have for us today?
I agree, Vince, totally. And I want to say that if you are older or you have the knowledge, I gave pots to my daughter. I gave her garden seeds. My grandchildren are so excited because the seeds are starting to sprout. I want to instill this in them so that they will continue it when I'm gone or I can't do it. So I feel the same way. My daughter has, as she's in her 30s now, she's like, Mom, I just didn't realize how nice it was to have things like you did it when I was a child. So I am trying to teach, and I think we need to leave a legacy. We need to teach our children as much as they're willing to learn. So I agree, Vince.
Okay. And, class, there's this stigma or this previous stigma about buying things used. I don't have those concerns. I'm willing to gladly willing to let the previous owner take the lion's share of depreciation on whatever it is, like that $150 bread maker for $10. Less than 10% of the original cost. As a matter of fact, Cathy, you probably bought it for less than the tax that was paid on the original purchase.
Yeah, I did.
Mm-hmm.
So, Vince, I got something I want to say before we end.
Please do.
And this is something that I learned. I did go through a master gardening class, but I learned it more from trial and error, is location when you're planting. If you have a plant and it says full sun, don't put it in shade or full shade. You could get away with partial sun, but at least 6 hours of good shade or sun if it says full sun. If you have plants that say shade, don't put them in full sun. You're not going to be that successful. And if, let's say you're putting like shrubs in front of a house, I see this all the time. People will go to the store and they'll buy this shrub that's maybe 12 inches high and 12 inches wide, but on the tag, when it's full grown, it'll say 10 foot by 10 foot. And then it takes over the front of the house and all you're doing is pruning it back. So just really be aware of the location and what the needs are for that plant.
Cathy, very well said. My mom in the 1970s used to drive a Fiat Spider convertible, two-seater convertible. And people would say to her, how do you like that Italian car? And she'd say, it's an Italian car, and it's like Italian people. It likes warm weather. And and it didn't like the cold. So think about what the plants want and give it to them. They'll do a lot better. They will. Cathy, thanks so much. Can you come back?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Ben.
Great. Thank you, Cathy.